I was the youngest of the 11 Thomas children. My name is Hiram. I was raised in Hingham, Massachusetts, educated in the public schools and Derby Academy. At the age of 15, I started my career in watchmaking. I was apprenticed to John Salisbury of Roxbury. He was a clockmaker. 3 years later, when my term was up with him, his business failed. As a result, I ended up working in a grocery store for about 6 months before I was able to enter the watch factory at Waltham, which was on the west side of Boston. 8 months later, the Civil War called. I enlisted into the 35th Maryland Volunteers, Company D, and exactly 6 months, it was exactly 6 weeks to the day. The first battle I was ever in the land, and it was called Antietam. Named for a small stream which winds through the south of Maryland, and it divided the north and the south armies. The Southerns called it Sharpsburg, based on the small town on their side of the creek. But that day, which was the 17th day of September of 1862, was the bloodiest single day of the Civil War. Nearly 23,000 men were killed or died of their wounds later in that one-day action. I was injured, accidentally, fairly seriously. As a result, I was deemed not fit for field duty, and I was transferred to the hospital corps and sent to Philadelphia, where I finished my entire enlistment. After I was discharged, I went back to the Waltham Watch Factory just for a short time, and then I left and I went to Newark, New Jersey, to a new watch factory. And there I was given a chance to work in the plate department. And that's the job I liked. But a year later, I left and I came to Elgin, because Elgin National Watch needed experience in their plate department. And I was given temporary charge of the department at the age of 24. 8 months later, in February, matter of fact, I was made foreman. 2 years after that, I married Martha Proud in Chicago. Then along the way, we built a nice home on Chicago Street, raised a daughter. And then one Saturday morning, 1909, I got up, went downstairs to read a paper before breakfast. Instead, I called my wife. I said, Maddie, I'm very sick. Call the doctor. She did, and he came. Dr. Abbott stayed when he found out that I had terrible chest pain. And to no avail, later on, a second attack was fatal. The funeral was 3 days later on Tuesday afternoon at 2 p.m. My people to carry the casket included George E. Hunter and 5 of the most distinguished watch factory men that were all also my friends. My plate department workers all came en masse, and after the funeral went back to the factory to work overtime to make up for time lost. During the nearly 41 years that I was foreman, I never lost a day due to illness. I was the last of the original Thomas family.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Good morning. My name is George M. Peck. I was born on August 14th, 1843 in Dundee. My father and mother, George and Marietta, originally came from Schenectady, New York, and they traveled to Illinois during the pioneer days. I spent my early youth on my father's farm, but at the age of 12 I decided to strike out on my own. I found employment as a dry goods store clerk, and at the same time I was able to attend the common schools of the day, and also found time to take a business course at a Chicago school. At the age of 17, I enlisted in the Union Army to fight in the Civil War. I was assigned to the 52nd Illinois Infantry with the rank of commissary sergeant. The people who enlisted in that war were men of great courage from all walks of life who had to endure many hardships. To give you an example of one of those hardships, let me quote Colonel John Wilcox of the 52nd, who describes what we had strapped to our backs while we marched those seemingly endless marches. The knapsack weighs about 2 pounds. In it, put a shirt, a pair of drawers and socks and pants, handkerchiefs, paper, and also a large woolen blanket weighing in all some 12 pounds. 40 rounds of cartridges with box belt, weighing fully 10 pounds, and our haversacks with 3 days' rations of provisions, and you have the load of our soldiers. Now, in February of 1862, we engaged in the capture of Fort Donelson. Later, General Grant pushed us deeper into Tennessee. Now, on August 6th, near a small country church named Shiloh, the Confederates surprised us. In no other engagement of the Civil War were there so many Elginites on the field of battle, nor so many killed at that time. Let me quote Elgin Private George Doney, who describes the scene. Our troops were falling back rapidly, and they were on us like thousands. The cannonballs and bullets flew at a terrific rate, and quickly our brave boys began to fall. Our regiment, along with the 58th and the 7th, retreated through a large, densely wooded area. When we emerged, we found a small, sunken road that was covered up with underbrush and small trees. The Confederates named that area the Hornet's Nest, and the reason they named it that was for the sting of our bullets every time they tried to attack us. For 7 continual hours of fighting, the nest held firm. But now it was the Confederates' turn to be surprised. By midnight, Union reinforcements began to arrive, and by 5 a.m., we were able to drive back the crestfallen Southern Army. But the fighting continued 3 long years after Shiloh. By the time I was mustered out of the service in 1864, my health had deteriorated to such a degree that it took me nearly 2 years to recover. When I did, I found employment as a clerk in a dry goods store again, until 1868, which at that time I was able to open my own store with the help of the Bosworth brothers. Later, I bought the old City Hall plot and built a 4-story building there. That became Peck's department store. It was the most successful department store in Elgin until the Palm Sunday tornado of 1920 completely flattened the building. Well, it wasn't going to let a small thing like a tornado stop me. I managed to keep the business going out of the 2nd floor of a nearby building, and at the same time I completely rebuilt Peck's. Shortly after that I sold the business to some young whippersnapper by the name, what was his name? Spice? Speece. Joseph Speece. I wonder whatever became of him. In 1877, I met and wed Julia Chapman. We lived at 620 Highland Avenue, which some people still call Peck's Place. We had 2 children, Margaret and Richard. Now, Julia was one of the organizers of the Old People's Home in Elgin. Margaret was also a supporter of the Old People's Home, as well as the YWCA. The Margaret Peck Edwards Learning Center at Elgin Academy is named in her honor. Now, Richard became Elgin's pioneering aviator. He was the first to fly over uncharted mountains in New Guinea, and also went to a primitive area in Papua on a scientific expedition. Sadly, my son and his entire crew perished while testing an experimental plane in 1931. Now, in addition to the department store, I was president of the Elgin Banking Company until 1933, and also president of the Elgin Windmill Company from 1910 until my death in 1935. At that time, I was 92 years old. I'd like to thank you for your time this morning. And before you leave, if you'd like to look through the window of the vault, you'll see a beautiful stained glass window inside. Good day.
say. There's a wide variety of pronunciations. I was born in 1836 in York, Canada. Some of you might recognize York, Canada as being part of Toronto now. My father was a captain on Lake Ontario and was one of the first captain to take a ship through the Welland Canal. Now the Welland Canal is a canal that goes around Niagara Falls. At that time, there was something called the Mackenzie Rebellion going on in Canada. And it was quite a divisive argument. Well, my father... We're trying for rain. My father was called into the sheriff's office because he had transported a sympathizer of Mackenzie. The sheriff told my father to take his hat off. My father's reply was, "I will take my hat off to no man." Well, we kind of figured that'd be a good time to leave the country right about then. So we came to Milwaukee, where my father could continue to ply his trade as a captain. We then came to Batavia. There was a call for the building of roads in this area. It was interesting, at that time, every able-bodied male was required to build roads 3 days per year so that we could get rid of the mud around here. Well, in 1851, my father died. And he and a farmer by the name of Spencer Johnson had made an agreement that he would raise me and send me to school until the age of 21, where he would give me a new suit of clothes and I'd be on my way. Well, I went to school, and I was told that I had to give a speech the next day. And I never went back to school. I really didn't want to do that. So I worked on the farm. In 1859, gold fever struck out in Pikes Peak. So a friend of mine and I thought, well, we'd head out there and make our fortune. Well, on the way out, we met a lot of people coming back. And they hadn't made their fortune. We sat down and discussed it a little bit and realized that if we continued going all the way out there, it'd be a longer walk back. So we turned around, came back home right then. Well, the war between the states started. And as a young man, thought I'd join up and end this here. And so I joined Company I of the 42nd Illinois. As soon as we mustered in, we headed south on the Mississippi River. We ran into a little problem at New Madrid, Missouri. There was an island out in the middle of the river called Island Number 10 that the Confederate armies had fortified, and they were not allowing any boat traffic to pass by. So we had to take that island. Well, we really couldn't. They were so well entrenched there that we really couldn't get by. So what we decided to do was dig a canal around the island on the Kentucky side. All spring, we were busy digging that canal. Mosquitoes and bugs and snakes. It was miserable, but we finally got it done. So the idea was that our gunboats would run up to the island, the Confederates would concentrate on them, and we would be able to take the canal and come up from the south on the island. And that we did. We were able to capture the island. So we continued going south, having battles here and there along the way, and got down to New Orleans and mustered out in 1865. Came home, and in 1868 married my wonderful wife, Martha. Well, I went into the woodware and cordage business in Chicago. Chicago was growing. There was trains that went into Chicago every day. You could get into Chicago and back home on the same day. Incredible. I went into business in Chicago. The business was thriving. And then there was a cow that caused a little problem. And it wiped me out. Well, because my experience was in the wood business, a company in Maine offered me a position. This is one of the values of being a member of the Grand Army of the Republic. You know people. So my wife and I went out to Maine, and our son Joseph was born out there. And I learned something out there in Maine. They have this tree called the Maine spruce that produces a sap that you can chew. Well, we came back to Illinois, and Elgin was a ripe community to start a company, and my brother-in-law, E. Dunham Waldron, he and I started a company, Grasshopper Chewing Gum Company. And we had a couple gums called Elgin Pride. And we figured that Elgin was going to be known countrywide because people would find Elgin gum under tables, under chairs. It would be all over. We also included in our gum pictures, cards, so that people could collect these cards with the gum. We thought it was a good idea. We would purchase these cards way ahead of time. There are various pictures showing different scenes, and things were going good. And in 1890, though, people's desires changed for different pictures, different things in their chewing gum, and we had to go out of business. And what we learned from that was that including cards with chewing gum would never, ever work. Well, because we went out of business, that allowed me more time to concentrate on my GAR activities. I was commander of the local post, 49. We were able to do more things, trying to get pension for veterans, also to make sure that the history of the war was accurate. So we were able to check textbooks in school. We had something called the Patriotic Instruction Committee. And what we would do is we would review history books. Sometimes history books weren't very accurate. They would say something along the lines of the reason for the war between the states was a difference in philosophy. When the reality was, the South was wrong. They were evil, and they needed to be conquered. We also made sure that memorials were celebrated to recognize the triumph of good over evil. We also wanted to make sure that the proper officials were elected, which meant they had to be Republican. I am proud to say that I have voted a straight Republican ticket since John C. Fremont, first candidate of the Republican Party. As time went on, in 1917 I got a little ill. Got pneumonia. And in order to try and take care of the pneumonia, my family sent me south to Florida. Wonderful little community, Seabreeze, Florida. Well, I passed away there in January of 1918. Sorry. Crotchety old guy. They had the nerve to bring me back here in January. It's cold. And they buried me right back there next to my lovely wife, Martha, beside my daughter, Helen, and our son, Joseph, who was only 6 months old when he died. Thank you.
Wonderful. You have your mustache now?
Yes, it is.
I'm not used to all that noise there, so it kind of hurt. I better get started here because they told me they only had a few minutes, and if I screw this up, then I go let me out again to talk. And it feels good, so I got to get started here. My name is Andrew Ratford. And I was born in Kentucky in 1833. And I'm going to try to give you a little bit of just a glimpse into my life in 3 different eras here. And the first era, of course, is when I was born a slave. Now, I know, and by the way, see, you don't know this. And you would have to have died to understand this, but I get a glimpse into your life. I know that. I don't mean inside your house and everything, but I get a glimpse of what goes on here in Elgin every now and then. So I get a little idea. I don't understand everything because they only give me a glimpse. But anyway, as a slave, I know that you learn about slavery from school and reading and TV, this thing you call TV that so many of you are glued to. And I know that a few years ago I was looking down and everybody was glued to the TV, and I'm looking, and they were watching this show. The guy said something about rips. And I said, well, let me look at a little bit of it here. And so I watched a little bit of it, and I'm laughing, and everybody's crying. And then it dawned on me that they're crying because they thought that this was how life really was. And I'm laughing because I didn't think it was like that. But there was some kind of parallel. But nevertheless, my life as a slave was really tough. And you would have to have been there, and you would have to have felt that cane across my back to understand what I'm saying, or that whip on my back to understand what I'm saying. So, you know, I led a life where every day, and there's a couple of students here, I think, in school, and they probably would like to see other whips on backs and stuff. But the life that I led, I had to be told, I was told when to get up and when to go to bed, what to eat, and when to eat it, and so forth. Some of the slaves would be killed if they made any attempt to read or learn to read. However, I had a good master that he allowed me to learn to read. Matter of fact, his son gave me some literature and helped me to read. So I could understand a lot of things that were going on in this world because I was being supplied information and so forth. But nevertheless, one day the master came and he had all the slaves lined up, and he said, okay, you're free. You know, I couldn't grasp what he was talking about. But he was telling me about this guy, the students here could probably help me. They call him Abe. I think he said something about Abe freed me. And I couldn't figure that out because he said something about a stroke of the pen there, and all of a sudden I'm a free person here. And so that was a double-edged sword there. I understand what I'm saying, because last night he told me when to go to bed, and he told me what to eat, and I think he was mad at me because I didn't tip my hat when this white guy walked across. So I was in trouble with him last night, and today, I can go. Well, go where? Go where? And do what? The only thing that I've ever done was to work his fields. So I had no skills. I didn't know where to go. And certainly I was born on his land and had no place to really call my own. I didn't know who my folks were because I understand that we were separated. But nevertheless, I took advantage of that opportunity though, and I left. And so I headed north because I read someplace that the north was a place for colored folks to go. So I went north. And on the way, I didn't know where I was going, didn't know what I was going to do, but on the way, met one of the other colored, and he said, well, why don't you go fight in the war? Well, I knew about the war. And I told him, are you kidding me? That's the white man's war. Why do I want to go fight in the white man's war and I don't know anything about it? He said, well, you'll get paid. Now, that was intriguing to me because I never got paid before. Never got paid before. So I said, okay. So I made my way to Tennessee and I joined up. They assigned me to the 13th Colored Regiment. And they gave me a rifle and this wasn't a hat that they gave me, but what they did see They gave me a long old rifle, had a bayonet, and I looked at it and I didn't even think that thing would work, what they gave me. So one day in a skirmish, I was walking along and I saw this rifle laying next to this guy with bars on it, and I took it. I figured he wouldn't need it anyway. And I left him my old one because I figured that if he wanted some protection, he can have that one. But so I got me a nice shiny. This wasn't what I actually used, but I got a nice shiny one there. But anyway, I fought in this war, and when I signed up, there were a couple of distinct things that in the 87 years that I've been living that I've been thinking about. And one of the things that I was thinking about was that there were about 90 colors lined up here, and here comes this general here, and kind of a rough guy. And he says, we were all lined up, and he says, are you slaves ready to fight in this war? And I looked one of my eyes, nobody said anything, nobody moved, and now he's mad. Nobody said anything, nobody responded. And he got loud and he said, are you slaves willing to fight in this war? And nobody said, so finally I took a step, and I'm sitting there, I said, no sir, I will not fight in this war as a slave, but as a free man, I'm willing to fight and die for my country. And so I took a step back. He liked that. But I was sincere. Now, I reflect on that statement in 80-some years because I'm trying to figure out what in the world I'm going to die for my country for, because a few months earlier, I was in chains and stuff, but nevertheless, I was sincere. I was ready to fight this war and die. And so they gave me $10. You know, you're talking about somebody that was having $10. I was overjoyed because I had worked this man's field and never got one penny, but they gave that white guy 15. I had a problem with that initially. But then when I felt that money and I stuck it in my pocket, I felt good. They gave me $3 for my clothes allowance and gave the white guy $5. So now we didn't fight in this, but it took me a long time to save my $3 up to come and talk to you folks and put on my Sunday best. So I got my Sunday best on here. But anyway, I fought in two bloody battles in Tennessee. And in one of the battles, there were 90 officers and enlisted men that were killed. Now, I'm going to tell you about a profound statement that was made in that battle, but I need to give you quickly an understanding of what I'm saying. See, when I signed up to go fight in this war, they sent me off to the camp, and they had me cleaning up the camp. I had a hard time with that, because that's not what I signed up to do. And what happened was, I understand that they didn't think slaves could fight, and that they didn't think colored but people would die. I thought they had some supernatural power there that I wasn't on that. But what happened was that we had to prove ourselves. So many of the colors died in the Civil War. They died unnecessarily. You don't get killed, but they died unnecessarily because they took unnecessary risks so that they can prove their bravery. So when the white generals and the other white officers and so forth saw that the colors could fight and that they surely were brave people, they began to integrate some units. And so jumping now to that day on the battlefield when this general came by, I'm standing there and he looks over with all these dead soldiers, colored and white soldiers, and he was sad that so many people had died at that battle. But then he said that there was at least some good that came out of it because the blood of the coloreds and the blood of the whites was running together, and they had come to unite in this common cause. So, you know, I talk about every now and then, I get a glimpse of what goes on down here, and sometimes you folks down here need to come together and fight some of these common causes without regards to college. But nevertheless, it didn't dawn on me what he was saying. But you know, when you just land there thinking, you know, you can go back and play a lot of things in your mind. And so I've been playing that statement, and that's what he came to me. And probably after the Civil War, there's a lot more that I went through in the Civil War, but I want to move on, because after the Civil War, I headed north and I made my way to Elgin. And I tell you, the hardest thing took place right here in Elgin. I met this beautiful woman. I think you guys and you young guys can appreciate it. I met this beautiful woman. And I tell you, to convince her to become my wife, Anna Langford. Street. The worst injustice that ever occurred to me occurred here in Elgin. What can I do since I was a slave? It was the way that I died. I think the good Lord must have forsaken me or something, because he kept me alive through my slavery. He kept me alive through my Civil War. But the way I died, I was ashamed that somebody was going through all of that to die falling down the stairs. There's just no justice in this world. Thank you.
Salem Everett Weld, and I'm here to tell you about my life here in Elgin. My family, my parents, Francis and Harriet, were among the original pioneers who settled in Elgin. They settled here in 1838, and they moved here from out east. And after acquiring a farm, I was born to them in 1842 on August 3rd. And my family was very typical of farming families in the community at the time. I attended the schools in the neighborhood, the public and district schools, and I received a good practical education. And as typical with farming families, as soon as I was physically able, contributed my fair share to the labor on the farm to ensure our productivity and survival. And I stayed at home with my parents. And in 1860, I commenced medical studies in the offices of Drs. Clark and Turner. And that went on for about 2 years, and then the war for the Union was ongoing. And that was a rather scary time, because the South had been preparing for several years, and were much better prepared for a war than we were at the time. And I saw many of my friends going off to war, volunteering, and many young men. And I felt that my duty then at that time was to postpone my medical studies and enlist. And so in 1862, in August, I joined the Company 1 of the 127th Illinois Volunteer Infantry. And after a year, I was promoted. I was made a hospital steward for the field hospital for the 2nd Division of the 15th Army. And I worked hard. I tried my best to maintain a good, efficient operation, and I was credited with having the best field hospital in the entire Corps. And for my reward for that, I was offered the captaincy of my unit. However, I felt that my medical skills were needed, and that my best way to serve would be to stay as hospital steward. So I turned down the captaincy. And I stayed with the hospital until I left, till I came home, returned to Elgin in 1865, and I immediately resumed my medical studies. And then in the spring of 1867, I graduated from the Eclectic Medical College in Cincinnati, Ohio, and opened up practice in St. Charles. And the practice lasted from spring of 1867 to December of 1868, so nearly 2 years. And then at that time, my cousin Russell and I opened a pharmacy together. It's a very successful pharmacy. We were in business together for 23 years. And near the tail end of that time, I met my wife, Elizabeth Hogue. She was a native of St. Charles. And we married in 1885 in May. And we were very happy together. And after a few years of being married, I divested myself of my interest in the pharmacy, sold to Edwin Hall, who maintained the pharmacy successfully himself, and on the corner of Chicago and Grove. And I've spent time with my wife and daughter. We adopted a daughter, Mildred. And however, in 1896, though, I decided to get back into business, and this was the third career change for me. I became involved in real estate and insurance at that time, so it was a little bit of a shift. In 1896, I partnered in that with H.W. Phillips, and we conducted business rather under the name of Weldon Phillips as a firm name. So that continued on until 1906 when I sold my interest in that to Fred Jenks. And at that point in time, I effectively retired. I spent my time with my wife and my family. And we had a beautiful home on number 10 Hamilton Avenue. And we were well known for our parties. We gave lots of parties, received guests regularly. And in those days, pharmacists had the best liquor, so we did well in that regard. And I was a Mason. I was a member of the Grand Army of the Republic Veterans Post and maintained an active life until 1925 when I passed on in November of 1925. And my wife, though, continued on well after me. She did not pass on until 1951. But Elgin was very good to us, to my family, and we had a good life here. And I hope Elgin is as good as to you as it was to us.
Well, good afternoon. I'm William Smales, affectionately known to my friends in Elgin as the Colonel. A little later I'll explain about the Colonel. I've decided to come down from my resting place up the hill, kind of snake around the trees and monuments. You can see a little flag and some flowers, and that's where I've been residing since 1917. I was born in 1842 in England. I had a brother and 3 sisters. My father was a tailor, and his father was a tailor. In 1853, my father decided it was time to improve life for the Smales family, so he packed us up and booked passage on a steamer, and we came across the Atlantic to the United States. In 1854, we found ourselves on a little farm about 6 miles east of here, what they called Hanover back then, and that's where I grew up. I worked on the farm. My father set up a tailor shop in Elgin, found time to go there and learn the tailoring trade. And in between the farm and the tailor shop, I attended some classes at Elgin Academy. In 1861, the Civil War broke out, and I dearly wanted to go off and enlist and fight to save the Union, but unfortunately I was needed at home. And so for the first 2 years of the war, while the fighting raged back and forth, I was here in Elgin working on the farm and in the tailor shop. Finally, in December of 1863, I was able to enlist, and I joined a very famous regiment. I joined the 36th Illinois Volunteer Infantry. The 36th was made up of men from the Fox River Valley. There were 1,354 of us who saw service in the 36th. I was in Company A, and of those 1,354, over 700, including me, were either killed or wounded. I received my training, and I went to join the 36th in the spring of '64. Now, the 36th had been active in the Civil War since the opening days. In 1862, it saw service in Arkansas at Pea Ridge. In the summer, it moved to Kentucky and drove the rebel General Bragg out of Kentucky. New Year's Day, 1863, found it in central Tennessee in the battle for Stones River. Late that summer, it was in northern Georgia at Chickamauga Creek, and in the fall, in November, it was involved in the dislodging of the rebels from Chattanooga in the battles of Missionary Ridge and Lookout Mountain. And in '64, it was going to play a very important role in Sherman's drive to Atlanta, and I was to be part of that. In May of 1864, we received our marching orders, and we began our descent from Chattanooga into northern Georgia. Opposing us was the famous Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston. And Johnston was a wily old fox who was known for his ability to construct considerable defensive positions. 2 weeks after we started marching into Georgia, we encountered Johnston in the little town of Resaca in northern Georgia. And after a bombardment that was 10 times louder than what you've been hearing here all day, the 36th was ordered to assault one of Johnston's positions. Company A had the honor of being the lead group, and I was right at the front of Company A, very excited. We advanced across an open field, and about halfway across we began to encounter fire from the rebels. I had no sooner than passed the halfway mark, I felt a pain in my lower left leg. I'd been wounded, had hit me. Now luckily for me, that rebel was using, for some unknown reason, a solid ball, because that ball passed through my leg. Had he been using the more standard bullet, the mini bullet, which was hollowed out, and which would have flattened upon impact, shattering the bone, and if that had happened, I'd be standing here with a wooden leg. I'd have been an amputee. Well, I was removed from the field of battle and taken to a field hospital. 2 weeks later, I was transferred further back behind the lines, and from there I was sent back to Quincy, Illinois, to the soldiers' home, where I was to recover, to recuperate. Quincy was an interesting place in 1864. Most of its young men were off fighting, and there were a lot of pretty young ladies in Quincy who didn't have much to do, and so they would volunteer at the soldiers' home. One of those young ladies, Emma Lane, and I became quite involved. In fact, a year later, Emma and I would get married in Quincy, but that's jumping ahead just a bit. I recovered from my wound well enough to return to service, but instead of being sent back to the fighting front, I was transferred up to Rock Island, and I worked in the ordnance plant there at the arsenal. This proved to be a pretty interesting thing because I rose in rank to a captain while I was at the ordnance. I was mustered out from service in November of 1865. I returned to Elgin and went into business tailoring. My brother Fred and I joined our father, and we became known as Smales and Sons. In 1866, I journeyed back to Quincy, and Emma Lane became Emma Smales, and Emma came to live with me in Elgin. And over the course of time, we had a family of 4. I never lost my interest in fighting, and in 1874, I formed a company of state militia, of which I became the captain. After 10 years of service as captain of this company of guards, the governor saw fit to give me a commission. I became a lieutenant colonel in charge of a regiment in the Illinois National Guard. And from that day on, people began to refer to me as Colonel Smales. I continued on in the tailoring business. I was also active in local politics. And in 1896, I ran for city council from the 5th Ward, of which I was a resident. I was elected, and evidently I did a good enough job because my constituents returned me for 2 more consecutive terms. My brother Fred passed away in 1897, and I lost some interest in the tailoring business after that, and I decided that it was time to do what you call today a career change. So in 1902, I divested myself of the tailoring business, and with my wife Emma, the children had grown and left home. We moved to South Haven, Michigan, where I purchased a small fruit farm. And for the next 8 years, I found myself raising peaches, cherries, and apples. But after 8 years, I gathered Emma and I said, you know, our friends are back in Elgin, and I've grown kind of lonely. I think it's time to think about moving back to Elgin. Besides, the winters in Michigan were much colder than they are here in Elgin. And so we were quite willing to return to the warmer climate. So in 1910, we sold off the fruit farm and we came back to Elgin. My son Fred worked in the watch factory. He had a large house over on Orange Street, just across the river. And so Emma and I moved in with Fred, and for the past 6.5 years, I've been living there. I spend my days mostly walking around town, greeting old friends and old customers. Lately, however, though, I've acquired a problem. I've developed a nervous disorder. and I've been unable to find anyone in Elgin who can treat this. And so I've decided that I will return to Quincy, to the Soldiers' Home. Being a veteran, I'm entitled to such benefits. And I hope to obtain treatment for this nervous disorder there. This was in the spring of 1917, in April. Colonel Smales did go to Quincy. Within 2 weeks of his arrival there, he took a sudden turn for the worse, and he died. His body was brought back to Elgin, and it was interred here, just up the hill. And that's Colonel William Smales. Thank you.
How might each and every one of you be on this absolutely stupendous Sunday? That was overwhelming. How are you today? I detect a wee bit of an accent in your voices. It's an accent that I grew to be ever so familiar with and fond of during my many years here in Elgin. In fact, the last group that went through said, you know, Patrick, I detect a wee bit of a brogue in your voice as well. Is it true? Do you hear a wee bit of an accent in my voice as well?
Yes.
That's what I thought. Well, this is probably due in large part to where I come from. Allow me, please, to make your acquaintance. My name is Patrick Tracy O'Flaherty, and I hail from across the Atlantic Ocean, from the land of enchantment, a land that the Almighty God created with his own hands, and rumor has it, he was quite well pleased with his work there. I spent my youth on Erin's Isle, and I grew to be a man marrying one Elizabeth Liddy in the year of 1846 on the 10th of April. It was that very year, that exact very year, that my beautiful Irish bride and I decided to move westward. And so we moved to the New World, first stopping in Canada for a short period of time, and then moving on to New York for an even shorter period of time. We then decided to move westward, and we made our home here in Elgin in the year of 1850. Now, my beautiful bride Elizabeth granted me 4 beautiful children, 3 of which whom the good Lord saw fit to take away at a very early age in life, as did the good Lord take away my beautiful bride Elizabeth. The year was 1852, first day of November. She left me and my beautiful daughter Sarah, who was very young, to continue onward. And indeed we did, because the O'Flahertys, well, they are our hearty stock, you see. I was a shoe and boot maker and worked for the firm of Clark & Watson here in Elgin. And I made with my own hands, of which I was very skilled with, custom boots and shoes for anyone in Elgin that wanted it. And therefore I knew almost everyone, and everyone knew me. It was a great relationship here. In the year of 1853, I was blessed a second time to be able to meet a beautiful Irish woman who came by way of Elgin the same way that we did here. We came to Elgin by way of New York. Thank you. We were very blessed to meet and married in 1853 in the month of May. Now, Eliza and the good Lord blessed us with 6 children. There were 4 lads and 2 lasses. The gentlemen grew up to be workers in the trades, and my daughters grew up to work in the watch factory. Now you might think that a man with 173 years under his belt would have a great number of stories to be telling you. And in fact, I think I do, but my memory's not as great as it once used to be. But there is something that I would like to share with you. For you see, it's my belief that each and every person here, regardless of how young or how many years they may have under their belt, remembers a specific day in their life where something very great happened, whether it be something positive or something that was more or less devastating. Well, I too, Patrick O'Flaherty, remember such a day in my life, and I'd like to be sharing it with you right now. 6th day of September in the year of 1862. This day found me at Camp Douglas in Chicago, where I voluntarily and of my own free will enlisted into Company C of the 127th Voluntary Illinois Infantry. For you see, my good friends and neighbors, there was a war between the states ongoing at this time. I and just under 6,100 men gave voluntarily of our time, most of them farmers walking away from their fields a few short weeks before the harvest. Many tradesmen, such as myself, leaving their skills. Many of us with loved ones at home, wives and children. We decided to heed a higher calling, and that we did. For example, I accompanied General Sherman on his march to the sea and participated in each and every one of the battles that you see listed here. But that's not so amazing. If there's something that you would like to leave here with, I'd like to leave you with the thought of the men from the 127, many of them being neighbors of mine, friends. For you see, the 127th was particularly hard hit. Many of these boys and men lost their lives. They would not return to the fields. They would never realize the harvests that needed to be had. They would never again sow seeds. They would never again work at their trades. They would never again feel the affection and the warmth from their spouse. And they would never again see the laughing, smiling faces of their children. But for some reason or another, and I can't quite explain it, the good Lord had his hand of protection upon me, because in the little less than 3 years that I served, I was mustered out as colonel with my health and body intact. I was very grateful for the experience and very thankful to be alive. I returned to Elgin making shoes and boots, this time as my own boss. But I sold my business in the year of 1883. At the age of 59, I decided that I'd lived a full life. I wanted to sit back and enjoy the number of days or weeks or months or years that the good Lord had left in store for me. So I retired, and I stayed that way for 9 months. For you see, at the time there was a postmaster in Elgin by the name of W.F. Hunter, and he said, "Patrick, wouldn't you be minded to help me out a wee bit?" I said, "What is it that I can do?" And so at the age of 60 years old, I became one of the first 5 letter carriers here in Elgin. What a great job this was. I got the chance to walk around Elgin and say hello to all my friends, and my feet, of course, never hurt because I had the best damn shoes in the valley. But I did this job for approximately 8 years, and in my late 60s, I decided for sure it was time to retire, and that's exactly what I did for the next 18 years. Until the year of 1905. The month was March. The good Lord called away my beautiful bride, Eliza. And a little less than 2 years later, on the 16th day of August in the year of 1907, after several weeks of a severe illness, I too joined her at her side. I have to be telling you that during my 50 plus years here in Elgin, it was a great life that I led. You see, I lived here in Elgin, I worked here in Elgin, I delivered letters to many of your forefathers. I made shoes and boots for the community, and I almost laid down my life, surely I gambled it, to just help save this great nation. That's not such a great thing, I don't think. I think all of us did that. Some of us were fortunate to live through. Some of us were not so fortunate. But if I can tell you something, I think you might appreciate this. The house that I lived in, which was located at 508 North River Road, which I understand has now been renamed to North Grove Avenue. That house at 508 still exists this very day. And most recently, I'm told, has been freshly repainted in bright colors. But what makes my heart especially happy is that the last name of the family that lives there is named Kelly. A great Irish name. Almost known better, maybe O'Kelly, but that's all. We appreciated tremendously our life here in Elgin. We could never ever repay you for the many kindnesses that were expressed to us over the many years in so many ways. So please, if you wouldn't be minded, please accept our heartfelt gratitude for allowing us to be an ever so small part of the lives of your forefathers. And just in case they be forgotten, please remember that the O'Flahertys are still with you this very day, and we remain eternally grateful for all that you've done for us. And so as I say goodbye on this very interesting weather day here in Elgin. I wish you nothing but the high road in life. And I sincerely wish for you the blessings that God bestowed upon us be bestowed upon you as well. I thank you for your time. God bless you, and I hope to see you again soon. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Tell you about everything that happened, I might as well tell you a little bit about myself. My name is James Hoagland. Our gravesite is over there, that big one. My daddy was a farmer. I grew up not far from here. My mother was a great lady, but she died when I was 13. 9 months after that, my father married another lady, and together they had a child named Charles. And at that time, I had 4 brothers. But when I turned 16, Charles and, well, my best friend, my brother Josiah, both caught sick, and they died in September that year. I was very upset about that. Between my mother and my 2 brothers dying, I decided that I wanted to get off the farm. So, I have heard that there was a war going on between the north and the south of our country. I didn't know very much about it because, well, news didn't travel very fast to our farm. So, I joined the Army because I thought that, well, maybe I could get away from the farm and see some things that I hadn't seen before. So, I joined the 52nd Infantry, the Elgin Boys, as we were called. And, well, the war really wasn't that bad for us. In the beginning, we marched around a lot, and then we'd march some more, and after that, then we'd march. And finally, we got down to a place called Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh Landing in Pennsylvania. And we stayed there for about a month. We camped outside of well, right next to a church named Shiloh Methodist Church. We stayed there for about a month. I hear that we were waiting for more troops. I don't know why we were waiting for them, but we were. And that's when it all happened, really. I remember one morning I woke up and, well, it was a beautiful morning. Some men were shining their shoes and sitting around talking, and I just sat down to a nice breakfast of rock-hard biscuits when, well, it seemed like the whole camp exploded. It turns out that the Confederates had led a surprise attack on us, and, well, it's not exactly what we were expecting after sitting there for a whole month. And, well, more than half of us had never seen a battle before. And, well, the Confederates were over there, so we ran that way very fast. And, well, finally we all formed ranks and started to shoot back because we noticed that they were eating our breakfasts, and we weren't too happy about that. So we started shooting back at them, and, well, a lot of men died that day. The Battle of Shiloh lasted 2 days, as a matter of fact. On the second day, I was shot by the Confederates. That didn't feel too good. After that, I guess we won the battle. Reinforcements did come, after all, and I was taken to St. Louis to a hospital. That was a long trip all the way to St. Louis, and the hospital itself wasn't so great. I didn't sleep very much in the hospital. All the men were wailing. It was horrible. But one morning I just didn't wake up. If I would have lived one more month, I would have been 17. I never made it to that. I would have liked to have done some things with my life had I lived past that. I would have liked to have maybe met a girl and married her and maybe had some kids. Could have told them all about Josiah and Charles and about their grandmother. But I never got a chance to do that.
Father, I'm asking you, would you please do this? Just do this for me, okay? I'm just not very good at public speaking, and you would do such a much better job than I ever would. Well, I know we were both at the Civil War, but I was only a kid. You were there. You were the real hero, Father. They don't want to hear my story. They want to hear yours. Please, Daddy, come on. Okay, you're right. You are right. Anyone who survives the Civil War, regardless of their age, like mine, can't help but have many memories of it.
Sarah.
Dwight, why don't you help me get Father to join us? I really don't want to do this today.
Sarah.
He'll listen to you. Oh my God. Dwight!
We have visitors.
Hi, it's so good to see all of you. Thank you for coming today. My name is Sarah Winchester Burlingame, and it's so nice to see you all here today. I was hoping my father, Dr. Edgar Winchester, would be able to join us, but apparently he has cold feet. I guess I'll have to do it for him. My father was born in England and my mother in Canada. That's where they met, in Canada, and brought up 4 children. I was closest with my brother, who eventually became a dentist and moved to Detroit. When I was only 2 years old, they traveled down south and settled in Illinois, in fact in Dundee. And shortly thereafter, my father started a practice in Elgin. Now, when I was 12 years old, I was very proud to become a member of the Elgin Baptist Church. In fact, it's a day I'll never forget. February 8th, 1861. The reason I can't forget it, it's the very eve of the beginning of the Civil War. Well, my father had offered his services in the South camps as a surgeon and physician, and he was called a year later. I was 13 years old at the time, and I wanted so badly to go with him. I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to see my father in action, to assist him, and I just thought it would be a lot of fun to spend some time with my father, just the two of us, you know? And so I begged him to take me, and against my mother's wishes, I went. I had no idea what we were both in store for over the next couple of years. My father was an amazing doctor. In fact, as the famous story goes about my father, a week after we arrived at the first camp, there were 3 doctors attending a very famous captain. The captain had a terrible bullet wound in one of his arms, and all 3 of the doctors agreed that the arm must come off. Well, the captain said, "No, I would rather die than to lose an arm." And that's when my father stepped in. Took a look at it and he said, "You know," he told the captain, "I think I can do something here. Would you mind it if one arm is a little bit longer than the other?" Well, the captain had so much whiskey in him at that point, because we were trying to keep the pain away, that he just went along with it. And you know what? It was a successful surgery. After that, the 3 physicians who recommended the amputation were amazed, and my father soon became one of the most popular doctors in the South during the Civil War. But I must tell you that my father is not the only famous doctor that I'm affiliated with. There is also my husband, Dr. Dwight Burlingame.
Yes, Dwight Burlingame, that's me. Thank you. It's good to see you here this afternoon. I'm a native of Massachusetts. I was born in Adams, and my mother and father were farmers. Well, I decided that I wanted to be something else, wanted to study, wanted to learn, and medicine got my attention. So after I graduated from high school, I came west, out here to Elgin, and I was a very fortunate fellow. I was fortunate enough to hook up with Dr. Edwin Winchester, the amazing physician and surgeon that Sarah says he was. He was an inspiration to me. He inspired me to study medicine with him in his office, and after saving the money that I acquired with him, why I went to the school in Chicago, the Chicago College of Medicine. There in 4 years I earned my medical degree and came back to Elgin. Well, I came back here and had a practice with Dr. Winchester as my partner for 2 years, after which he went on to California. But at the end of the first year of practicing with Dr. Winchester, why, I started practicing with his daughter, Sarah. We got married, that is, became husband and wife, and had a wonderful practice here for 42 years. It was a good practice.
And when I'm asked to think back on the important things in my life as a physician here, I would say it's continuing education. I decided that it was a very bad idea to rest on my laurels of my medical degree, and so once a year, for at least a month, I would travel to the East. I would go to the colleges of medicine in Philadelphia, New York, and study, learn the things that were being taught out there, where the information was available. Then I went in the 1890s, because of our successful practice, I had the opportunity to go to Europe, and I studied in Berlin, in Paris, to learn about the new technology of medicine that they were doing in Europe. Brought it back here. What I did with it was another important thing. I shared the information with my colleagues. With the American Medical Association and the Kane County Medical Society, I would provide these folks with the information that I obtained over there. And most importantly of all, we then all together were able to provide the benefits. Yes, our patients would depend on us in those days. They depended on us when we were summoned to go to them wherever they were, no matter what the weather, whether we had to take a horse with just a saddle or a cart or a carriage or a wagon that's covered, no matter what the weather, rain or sleet or snow, why, it was important for us to be there for them. And we tried to do that. Well, you know, this continuing knowledge that we were able to acquire came from one single source, and that was the tragic and unfortunate war between the states. It was the carnage and the destruction that gave us the opportunity to become so familiar with the human body and all of its mysteries and all the knowledge that was therein. But I wasn't able to be there. I wasn't able to be there, but Sarah was.
Yes, I was. Over the course of those 2 years, there's one memory that stands out in my mind. And that is when we got to the first camp and there were these large tents drawn up for the wounded soldiers coming in off the riverboats. Many of them didn't make it along the way on the boats, and so the dead bodies were stored, stacked up on one end of the tent, waiting to be transported again. While the wounded soldiers that might have a chance to make it were laid on the ground in the tent. We didn't know what to do to help. There was no training for the women that were down there. Many times I was with my father assisting, and many times days would go by where I was doing whatever I could and I didn't even see him. Sometimes I would be at one end of the tent attending the wounded soldiers, administering wounds, giving them water, and I would hear my name called across the tent, and I would look, and there would be a surgeon waving me to come and assist with an amputation. And so I would have to walk through the tent with all the bloody bodies looking up at me and grabbing at my skirt and begging me to help them, to just help them. There was nothing I could do. You know, the women that were there for the war were known as the ladies with the flasks. We carried these little metal flasks of water, and we tried so hard to keep everything clean and neat to prevent infection. If a man saw us coming with those drops of water, they would be glowing, thinking they may have a chance to survive. Sometimes they didn't survive. And you know, they tried to help us, knowing that they were about to die. They would cross their arms, put their legs together, and close their eyes, so that in their passing, we wouldn't have to do it.
Sarah, I think these good people might be thinking that our life here in Elgin was nothing but death and destruction.
You're right. We had many happy times after the war.
And for every one of those soldiers who lost their lives in service of this country, there were many more that returned and regained their health. And there were patients that we saw and helped. And there were babies born.
Two of them being our own. They were born right in our very house. Anna was named, well, Anna is named after my mother, and my mother's stone is over there. And yes, Hattie, right?
And yes, and we had a very nice home. We had a home down on the corner of DuPage and Villa Street. It was a great home. And we had a telephone, by the way. What was our telephone number? Sarah, number 4?
That was number 4, our
telephone. Number 4.
How could you forget?
We were the 4th telephone in Elgin. And after we got the telephone, why, anybody who wanted to call us could call us on the telephone. That was quite a thing. I was proud of that telephone, wasn't I, Adam? Sarah? Adam, Sarah?
Our house has since been raised and is now where the Elks Lodge stands.
If you all ever happen to need some medical attention, and you can remember the number 4, try us. We may be there. Thank you for coming by this afternoon.
The name's Webster, Lyman Webster, Private, Company G, 75th Illinois Volunteers. Young fella just came up to me a few minutes ago and said, "Mister, you gonna tell us about the Civil War?" Well, there ain't a damn thing civil about this here war, if you ask me. Good Union fighting men refer to this as the Great War of the Rebellion. It all started for me back in the spring of '62. I was farming with my folks, Parker and Luana, down near Pawpaw, Illinois, about 75 miles south of here. We got word of the great battle that had taken place at Shiloh, about all them brave Illinois boys who'd gotten killed there, and how President Lincoln needed to raise about 200,000 more of us boys to put down this rebellion. Well, when I got word that they were putting together a regiment over at Dixon, I was the last one that wanted to be called a coward, so I headed on over to Dixon and signed up. The next thing I know, I got this here musket and backpack, and we're headed down into Kentucky after some Confederate general by the name of Bragg, who had the gall to think he was going to come up and take the Ohio River from right under our noses. Well, as luck would have it, that October in Kentucky they were having a hell of a drought. And our whole regiment was covered with dust, and not a man in our company had a drop of water in his canteen. About the time we thought we were going to drop from thirst, Colonel Goodings came up to the front of our regiment and said that if we could make it just a few more miles, there was a place ahead with a nice river and good water. And the name of that town was Perryville, Kentucky. As you can imagine, them Rebs was just as thirsty and tired as we were, and as luck would have it, they had found that water first and crossed that river and run smack dab into the whole left Union flank. Well, it was late afternoon by the time the 75th was rushed up to plug a gaping hole in the Union lines. Just as we reached the edge of that battlefield, we ran into a fellow by the name of Patrick Claiborne and 5,000 Tennesseans. Well, for 2 hours we stood there and fired lead and fire into their faces from no farther than 20 rods apart. By the time the fight was ended, all we could see of those Rebs was a flash of their muzzles in the darkness. It's hard to think back on that day now that 75th Illinois lost over 225 men in 2 hours of fighting. Well, the Army of the Ohio, as we were known, then chased that scallywag Bragg all the way down into southern Tennessee. And we figured by late December we had him trapped down by the banks of the Stones River at a place called Murfreesboro. I'll never forget Christmas Eve dinner on the banks of the Stones River, 1862. Christmas Eve dinner we had Army crackers and salt pork and a freezing rain. Nothing more to keep us from that freezing rain than wool blankets. Next thing I remember was New Year's Eve day, 1862. We were just crawling out of those blankets and fixing to boil coffee when half the Reb Army came a-hollering and screaming into our camp. Well, we grabbed our muskets and made a gallant stand, but most of our ammunition got wet in the rain the night before and we had to fall back. Part of my company got separated from the rest of the regiment and we took cover in a grove of cedars. I was looking out through a clearing in those cedars and I could see a Reb officer ride up on a horse. I heard him holler to his men to fix bayonets and start to search for prisoners. At that time, the worst thing I could think of was being a permanent guest of Jeff Davis. So I raised my musket, took aim at that officer. When the smoke had cleared, I saw he'd slid off his horse and fell dead. Well, we all was rounded up and taken prisoner at that point. They marched us on into Murfreesboro, Tennessee, loaded us on dirty cattle cars for a long, cold January train ride all the way to Richmond, Virginia. On that train ride, I contracted lung fever and soldier's bowels, and I was in bad shape. When we got to Virginia, they took us to a place you might have heard of, Libby Prison. Well, they separated out our officers at Libby. They took us enlisted men on to a place called Bell Island. And Bell Island was nothing more than a brickyard in the center of the James River. Well, that bad grub and the cold was making me worse, and I knew if there was nothing I could do soon, I wasn't going to see these beautiful prairies of Illinois again.
luck would have it, they had a prisoner exchange going on about that time. They were going to exchange 100 Union prisoners for 100 Confederate prisoners. The Reb officer came into camp one morning and started to read off that list of Union prisoners. And he got to that end of that list, and my name wasn't on that list. That made me so dang mad. I got up and got in that line anyhow. When they got to the end of the line, the guards took one look at each other, and I heard them whisper, "I think we miscounted. We got 101 soldiers here." And I heard the other guard whisper to the first one, "You know you can't count good past 20. Hallelujah. The next thing I know, I'm on a train for the military Union Hospital in Annapolis, Maryland. They had me there for about a month and then transferred me out to the military hospital at Denton, Ohio. And I spent the next 5 months trying to get over my infirmaries there. Finally, one day, the Union surgeon came into camp, took one look at me and says, "Son, you're too sick and too weak to help Uncle Abe in this fight anymore." And so they gave me a medical discharge. Well, that's about the end of my military career. I tell you what, folks, it's been nice talking to you today, but I got a train to catch here for Dixon in about 15 minutes to see my wife, Melissa, who I ain't seen in over a year. So you'll excuse me if I'd like to take your leave. Remember, God bless the Union and Uncle Abe, and have a good day.
Good afternoon. It is kind of you to stop and visit with me today. You may wonder why I was asked to speak with you, for I was not a participant in the War of the Rebellion, or the Civil War as you now call it, but our family certainly was affected by the war. With your permission, I would first like to share with you some of our family history. I was born on May 30th in 1812 to Joseph, to Hannah and John Tucker, near Boston, Massachusetts. At the age of 23 in 1835, I traveled west to the Fox Valley with my brother John. We settled in Clintonville, near my then future husband, Joseph Fennell Horan. Joseph and I were married in October of 1835 in Chicago, the closest town to have a minister. Our wedding tour, which lasted 4 days, was made in a Hoosier wagon pulled by oxen. Joseph had arrived in the Fox Valley in April of 1835, and on May 5th staked a claim in Clintonville, 3/4 of a mile east of the river. Perhaps you know of the name Horan, for he is considered one of the first settlers of the area, and to this day there is a road named after the family. We built a log cabin, 14 feet by 14 feet, and Joseph commenced farming. Joseph was a God-fearing man with strong moral convictions. He was quite outspoken in his opposition to slavery, secret societies, and the use of alcohol and tobacco. On several occasions, he spoke publicly, stressing temperance. We were blessed in our 54 years of marriage with 6 beautiful children. Grief, cannot imagine the grief that we felt by the loss of 3 of our 5 sons early in their precious lives. 2 boys died at the ages of 2 and 4 in August of 1840. And in September, the next month, we lost our infant son. Our 2 remaining sons lived to be young men. I survived 5 of my 6 children by more than 30 years. In 1888, Joseph died. I moved in with our only surviving child, our daughter Cornelia. I lived with her until my death in 1903 at the age of 90. I have spoken of Clintonville. Perhaps you are not familiar with that town, for it has had several names over the years: Clinton, East Clinton, and since 1876, South Elgin. To put into perspective our arrival to the Fox Valley, I would remind you that Illinois had been a state for only 17 years. there were only 100 residents in the entire Kane County at that time, there were still many Fox and Potawatomi Indians in the area. The nearest post office was 25 miles away, quite a distance by horse. We received mail only twice a month, and oh, we so looked forward to hearing from our family and friends in the East. I mentioned two of our sons living a bit longer. One of our sons, Joseph Morris, enlisted in the Illinois 52nd Infantry, which was organized in Geneva in 1861. He was one of 965 men who was shipped to Benton Barracks, Missouri, near St. Louis. Benton Barracks was a place where soldiers were recruited and where infantry troops were organized and practiced drills. More often than not, they waited there for weapons. When rifles and artillery was shipped from factories, orders were given and troops were sent down the Mississippi River by boat and then sent on foot or by rail to the front. Our son served a very short time in the military. He died after 6 months serving as a corporal. He died of pneumonia at Benton Barracks in March of 1862. In April, his regiment went on to fight one of the bloodiest battles, Battle of Shiloh. I often think of those boys there, for our son would have been there. More than 23,000 boys and men died in that battle. Was our son more fortunate to have died before Shiloh? What would have been his fate there? What did those boys and men experience on the field? What horrors did they see? How long did those who died suffer before they died? You can only imagine and mourn such a great loss. The war left many families bitter and divided. Certainly mothers of boys in gray felt no less grief for their sons than mothers of boys in blue. It would serve no purpose for time to allow us to forget what these boys and men did for us and for our country. Yet, does it serve any purpose to glorify this war? Or any war, for that matter? I thank you, Dr.
Children are welcome to come up here, sit by me. See, I love having children around me. I really love children, and for some reason they love me too. Maybe it's because whenever I see children, I stop and tell them my war stories. Like war stories? See? A lot of times I'll teach them patriotic songs, because I love to sing, and they would sing along with me. And sometimes I'd even teach them my favorite song, Illinois. I'd sing you a few bars, but ever since I became ill, my voice has really deteriorated, and I'm kind of ashamed of it now. I used to have quite a good voice and sang in the choir for a number of years, but ever since I took ill, my voice isn't quite the same, so I won't sing anything for you today. However, I really do like children. One of the saddest parts of my life is the fact that my wife Sarah and I, who were married 59 years, were never able to have any children of our own. I'm sorry, I got so involved in talking about the children, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is James A. Palmer. Perhaps some of you have driven by my house, the Palmer House. No, not the one in Chicago. The one on Chicago Street, 326 Chicago Street, as a matter of fact. It's still standing today. I was born in Howard, New York, so I guess you might say I was a New York Yankee right from the start. My family moved west when I was 20, where I opened my first business, a furniture business in Iowa, of all places. Shortly thereafter, the War of the Rebellion broke out. You people today might refer to it as the Civil War, but we called it the War of the Rebellion. It was a terrible thing. Being a patriotic person that I was, I enlisted in the Union Army. I served in the Army for 3 years as part of the 14th Iowa Regiment. I became a non-commissioned officer, serving as a commissary sergeant. In case you don't know, a commissary is a store that sells supplies to soldiers. In the Battle of Shiloh on April 6, 1862, I was taken prisoner and housed in Andersonville, one of the most horrible prisoner of war camps of all times. Conditions were horrible, and the treatment of the prisoners was even worse.
Not being one to sit around and see what was going to happen, a couple of prisoners and I decided we would kind of tunnel our way out. So we began. It was a long and tedious job. It took weeks. Finally, the day came for us to try to escape. We drew straws to see in which order we were going to go. A couple of the prisoners actually got out. Right before it was my turn, we heard a gunshot from the direction of the tunnel. They discovered the tunnel, and I was unable to escape. Now, fortunately for me, the Confederates were dying in such large numbers that for some reason they didn't kill me. I was able to stick around another 30 days and was involved in a prisoner of war exchange. Confederate prisoners for Union prisoners. After the war, we found out that our brigade was given the nickname the Hornet's Nest Brigade because of the intensity of the firing there. It was like walking into a hornet's nest, not knowing you were going to get stung. So we're kind of proud of that particular nickname. Needless to say, the War of the Rebellion was a terrible one, and one I will never forget. After the war, we moved to Illinois and settled first in Geneva, a little town just south of here. My job in Geneva was to make 2,800 maps for a Geneva business house. 4 years later, in 1872, we moved to Elgin, where we spent the rest of our lives. Now, as in Elgin, I undertook a rather difficult undertaking and became an undertaker. I should tell you that after the Civil War, undertaking was an additional service of furniture businesses that employed cabinet makers. I was first employed by Mr. T.H. Thompson. Later, Mr. Oliver Hinsdale, a friend of mine, and I bought the business from Mr. Thompson. Anyone care to venture a guess as to what a funeral cost around that particular time? Let me use Mr. James Gifford, Elgin's founder's funeral, as an example. Now, he died in 1850, a little bit before my undertaking business, but mine was like 1872 to 73, so give or take 20-some years. Mr. Gifford's funeral was one of the more elaborate ones of the time. His funeral cost the grand total of $12. $9 for the coffin, $1 for the outside box, $1 for the grave digging, and $1 for the hearse. Anyone care to venture what a funeral costs today? Let's just say a little more than $12. As an undertaker, I offered several mortuary services to Elgin. For a long time, I was the only embalmer in the city. And I featured also what I would call the first full-service funeral business in Elgin. I didn't just drop off a coffin at the deceased's house and say, here, you lay him out. I took care of laying out the body, secured all the flowers, pallbearers, hired carriages, and even selected the music. So I was the first full-service funeral business in Elgin. When I retired in 1907, another partner, Mr. Fred Norris, took over and continued to make innovations in the funeral industry. He bought the first limousine hearse. He later erected the first funeral parlor in Elgin at 226 East Chicago Street. Later was known as Norris Mortuary and was the first air-conditioned building in Elgin, which leads me to ask if people were dying to get in, especially in the summertime. One of my most enjoyable activities outside my work was my affiliation with the First Congregational Church of Elgin. I love that church and its people. I was a member of that church for 41 years, considered myself a devout Christian. Seldom did I miss a service or meeting. When the door was open, I was there. I was fortunate enough to sing in the choir for 38 years, and often at church reunions, every couple of years, they would ask me to sing my favorite song. Remember what that was? Illinois. Didn't know there was going to be a quiz, did you? But you passed. Illinois, that's right. I also served in the deacon board for 15 years, and as a member of the trustees for 22 years. So I spent many, many hours at the First Congregational Church of Elgin, all of them very happy ones. Another highlight for me was the Memorial Day Parade and services in Elgin every year. The year that I died in 1915, I'm told they paid a very special tribute to me. As the parade got to my house, the drummers stopped drumming, the music stopped playing, and all the men removed their hats. And it went that way silently past my house, where once they passed again, the music began playing, the drummers began drumming, and the men put their hats back on. It was said it was out of special respect for Comrade James A. Palmer. A very nice tribute to me. I appreciate you all coming by and hearing a little bit about my story. Hope all of you, but especially you children, will take great pride and participate in your community to make it a better place to live. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
It's peaceful here on this hillside overlooking the lush bog and the beautiful forest which encircles it. And for a soul that's been to hell and back, it's a fitting place of rest. It's quiet and serene here under this oak tree, save for an occasional ceremonial volley. I've been fortunate in my life that I've been able to spend time in Elgin, my beloved Elgin, a place of peace. But excuse me, for I forget my manners. My name is George DeForest Sherman, United States Army retired Major. And I welcome you to my place of rest for nigh on to 14 years. And as I grew up in Elgin, I had peace. The peace that comes from a strong family. My mother, Jeanette, and my father, Henry, hard-working farmers and religious people who brought me up right, who worked hard for the benefit of the community. My parents are the parents that donated the property for Sherman Hospital. And I was fortunate, too, to have family. My sister Julia, who's buried here, and my sister Cornelia, who is buried with her parents, with her children and her husband in Michigan. And we grew up in Elgin, and I attended Wing Park School, as did they, and I went to Elgin Academy, as did they. But rather than confuse the story, for I've already gotten it out of order, let me back up and start at the beginning. I was born August 12, 1838, in Milo Center in Yates County in the Finger Lakes area of New York. And my folks had come there and married from the Dutchess County area of New York, Armenia, between New York City and Albany. And after I was born, and before my sisters were born, my parents traveled west, and they came to the fertile valley of the Fox River, and they settled out west of what is now the city of Elgin. I was fortunate and led a regular childhood, and upon graduation from Elgin Academy, I returned to the land of my parents in Troy, New York, where I began further studies and schooling. But it was the fall of 1861, and the rebels from the South had fired upon Fort Sumter, and President Lincoln had issued a call to arms. And I answered that call to arms by returning to Elgin and joining with 1,133 of other people from the area in forming what was to become called the Fox River Regiment. And we began our organization and training at Camp Hammond just outside of Aurora. From there, we traveled by train, and we went down by train through Illinois to St. Louis to the Armory. And it was at that point that we were issued rifles, muskets, Ennies and Millfield, Enfields and Millies. And we then marched to Rolla, Missouri, where we bivouacked and camped until January or February of 1862. Each day training, shooting, reloading, marching, and drilling. And we engaged in the campaign of Missouri, and were successful in those campaigns at Peeville and Kitesville and Bentonville and many a battle. And the young group of boys that had come from Elgin and the Fox River quickly became men. We had saved the state of Missouri for the Union, and at that juncture we traveled eastward through Tennessee, through parts of Mississippi, parts of Alabama, into Kentucky, and joined General Sheridan's Army of the Cumberland. And it was there that we engaged in some of the most awful battles of the Civil War. Not the big ones like Shiloh and Vicksburg that you hear about, but other ones where men were hurt and injured and died. Stone River, Tullahoma, Chickamauga. In fact, our defeat at Chickamauga was so resounding that we were forced to retreat back to Chattanooga, at which point we were encircled by the armies of the South and besieged for a long period of time, each day facing artillery bombardments, shooting, charges, and attempts for us to break out. Fortunately for me, I survived that, for in that campaign I literally had a horse shot out from underneath me. I was also fortunate in that I was able to lead the charge up Missionary Ridge, and our company was able to plant its flag on the top of Missionary Ridge, which breakout allowed us to escape and to join with General Burnside in Knoxville. Because of my actions, I was promoted from lieutenant to major, and I joined the staff of General Philip Sheridan. The balance of the Union Army from Illinois, the 35th, the 36th, the 45th, and the Missouri 25th joined parts of the 7th, 127th, and 157th under the command of General Sherman. It began what was called, eventually, Sherman's March to the Sea. In a lot of ways, I feel fortunate not to have participated in that, for it was a bitter, nasty, angry campaign that those on the side of the South have to this day still called the most despicable action of one human being against another. After we were successful in winning the war, I returned to Elgin. And along with many others far more deserving, I received the accolades of my fellow townspeople as a hero. And I was able to work, first at D.C. Cook, then at various businesses of my own. I was able to travel, serving as an agent of the Indian agent in Colorado in the mountains. I was able to again serve in the Spanish-American War of 1898 and was a paymaster at age 60 with the rank of major. And it was I who paid Theodore Roosevelt, later to become president, his wages as he stepped off the boat from Havana. In addition to that, I might add with a great deal of Elgin pride, my accounts for the war balanced to the penny. I was active in many social affairs, having helped found the Grand Army of the Republic chapter here in Illinois, in Elgin, number 49. I was an accepted and Freemason of the organization 117. I was commandant of the 36th Knights Templar organization. I helped found the Elgin Country Club, and I helped found the Century Club of Elgin, a civic organization which did many acts of kindness and goodness and raised money for those who were not quite so fortunate. And I thank Almighty God for my life, and I thank Almighty God for being able to live in Elgin, such a wonderful place, and I thank you for your time and listening.
Hi, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Henry Clay Swan. This is my horse, Jim. I was born September 17th, 1843. I was born in a little town called Rome. It's in Oneida County, New York. I was the youngest of 6 boys and 2 sisters. I ran a livery stable here in Elgin for 37 years. In 1848, at the age of 5, my parents moved from New York to Illinois, and we took up residency in McHenry County on a small farm near Wonder Lake. I helped with the chores there during my youth and went to public school on a restricted basis. I learned how to read and write. In 1862, at the age of 19, my brother Clark and I, we decided to leave the farm and join the Union Army. This was at the onset of the Great War of the Rebellion. You probably referred to it as the Civil War or the war between the states. Clark and I went to Rockford and joined the Company A of the 95th Illinois Volunteers. Shortly after our enlistment, we were on detached services to the headquarters of the Army of the Tennessees outside of Memphis. My job at that time was a courier. I ran dispatches, orders, troop movements back and forth across enemy lines. Usually it was under the cover of darkness over open fields. We were always in fear of ambush or death. I don't fear it anymore. In 1863, I had the great honor to serve under the great General Ulysses S. Grant. Guys in the company said I always had something in common with the great general, but I could never figure out what it was. Got a little story I'd like to tell you that came out of the 95th. I served with a trooper, Albert Cashier. Now, he was considered the smallest man in the company. We mustered out together in 1865, and Albert went back to Rockford. I kind of lost track of him over a few years.
But in 1911, I got a dispatch from the government Department of Wars and Pensions. They wanted some members of our company to come back and testify in a hearing that was being held against Albert to determine whether he was right, whether he should get his pension or not. Well, come to find out after we got there that Albert had been involved in a very serious automobile accident in Rockford, which required him to go to the hospital and have surgery done, major surgery. It was learned at that time that Albert Cashier was indeed Miss Jenny Hodges, an Irish immigrant woman that joined the 95th Illinois Volunteers to fight against the Confederacy in 1862. It was a feat in itself that she concealed her feminine identity for 19 years, from 1862 to 1911. After the war, I went up to McHenry County and started a livery business. I worked at the livery business for approximately 10 years. Then in 1875, I took up a partner and we came down here to Elgin and started the Swan Smith Livery Feed Boarding and Sales Stable, which was located on Grove Avenue. Shortly after the partnership, my partner met and married my sister Anna, and they moved away and left me high and dry with the livery stables. So I renamed the stables the Henry Swan Feed and Board Stables. Got a picture of it here. I married May Elizabeth Lowe, September 12th, 1893. She was my wife for 23 years. We ran the new stables, the renamed stables, and we lived at 486 Stella Street until 1907. In 1907, we moved again because the business was real profitable, and we moved into what they call the lower Gold Coast of Elgin, which was 644 Douglas Avenue. Now that's at the corner of Douglas and Lovell right now. Well, it was always there. 1908, I came down with an undiagnosed illness of the time. Nobody knew what it was. And it was a lingering type illness. I felt bad for years. I worked with May at the stables and so on, but I found it necessary to sell the stables in 1911 to a gentleman named George Barnes. Now George immediately changed the name of the stables to the Virginia Stables, and he took up a lucrative contract with the city to maintain and care for all the city police, fire, and ambulance horses. I worked with him for a short time. Then in 1914 I did retire, mainly because of my illness, and May and I moved to 260 Milwaukee Avenue. Now Milwaukee Avenue is located, it's East Highland Avenue right now. It ran from River Street to Geneva Street on the east side. Now River Street is just about, well, the group before said it was just about where the post office is now. We lived there for a short time, and then on July the 16th, 1916, I moved one more time to the Bluff City Boulevard Cemetery. Compliments of my comrades at the GAR, which was the Grand Army of the Republic, gave me a fine funeral. Full military honors. And I passed away at 72 years, 6 months, and 4 days young. Thank you for visiting me.